public concern are really quite high, and it just comes to my mind, it just does come back to the leadership issue. Somebody's got to do a better job of explaining this to the public. Sorry, that was a terrible answer.
We obviously have a lot of business people in the audience here, because the next question is, what about Chinese companies opening more plants in the United States to be close to the market? Can't leaders embrace this as one solution?
Well, I think, I mean, that's the final, if I was thinking about a sort of then and future of the US-China economic relationship, the future, it seems to me, is much less about trade and much more about investment in both directions. American firms wanting to get access to the Chinese marketplace, so being in China to sell in China rather than being in China to produce low-cost goods to come back to the US. That's one side. But the second side is the be careful of what you wish for side. The logical consequence of driving up the RMB was that Chinese asset holders would say, buying things in the United States is a much better deal than it ever was. And in fact, you know, all we do is we wait and it becomes a better deal every day. Is the American public ready for Chinese investment, large-scale Chinese investment in the US? For the reasons that I just gave, I think the answer to that question is no. And is there, and
should they be?
Should they be? Yes, because it's going to be a reality. And I think the thing that we've learned 20 years later about, you know, was it a bad thing to have Toyotas and Hondas built in the US and tailored to the American market? It was clearly a very good thing for the US. Might it be the same thing with respect to some Chinese firms? I would imagine the answer would be yes. I would just note historically that it took quite a while for that to be accepted in the US, and it happened against this some great differences between China and Japan. Democratic ally, the US wanted Japan to spend more on defense, not less, the way it does with China, and the Japanese economy went into free fall for 15 years. I don't think any of those things hold with respect to China, so I would expect that there'll be heavy political sledding on Chinese investment in the US, and at the elite level, we should note that CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the US, didn't say yes to the minority stake of Huawei in 3Com recently. You know, it wasn't a big story, I think, out there in, you know, on Main Street, but I think everyone who was looking at investment saw that as a pretty big deal.
But you know, it seems to me the key point you make is it's inevitable. I don't know how you can stop it. I think that it could create political furor, but I don't think it's going to be stopped. If you look at the discussion that preceded this one on the sovereign wealth, it's getting attention. There's lots of fear, anxiety attached to it. But if you're talking about whole-scale investment that's simply legitimate and done through the markets, I don't know that you can stop it.
Every state sends trade delegations abroad looking for investment in their states.
Yep. But that is the, I mean, you used an interesting qualifier one, which I think is the right one, which is as long as it's done legitimately through the market forces, right? And the question with respect to Chinese investment always is, we can't tell the difference between a government investment and a private investment. And I think that specter, so it's the specter of lack of transparency. We don't really know, you know, is the state everywhere or is the state vanishing in China? People don't know the answer to that question, so there's skepticism. And then when it comes to high technology things, which is obviously an area of great importance to both economies, the other problem with high tech stuff is that almost anything in the high tech space could be dual use. So any concerns we have about national security just get funneled right into what might seem to be regular, legitimate business transactions.
I thought one of the most brilliant initiatives by a very competent U.S. leader was the creation of the Strategic Economic Dialogue, which brings together twice a year a whole group of cabinet-level officials to sit down together and talk about the strategic future of our economic relationship. But we're at the end of an administration. What do you think chances are that a new administration will continue this type of dialogue, and is there a possibility that it could expand into other areas through the creation of other types of mechanisms for getting our top leaders to know each other so that they can deal with each other more effectively?
Well, I think that you're exactly right about the strategic economic dialogue in the getting to know in a quiet, behind closed doors environment. But the other thing I'd note about the strategic economic dialogue as a matter of politics is that it was a large failure, it seems to me, precisely because if 13 cabinet level officials from the US go to Beijing, people are going to say, what are you going to bring back? And the answer, the Paulson answer always was, not very much. This is not about bringing things back. It's not about political grandstanding. It's about what you accurately characterize. So it seems to me it's the right policy, but you run into a political vulnerability. So maybe this brings us back to the campaign trail. You know, what is true about both Senator Obama and Senator Clinton on these issues is they're both now, in some sense, they've been caught with a sort of whispering campaign that says, listen, on the stump, we've got to say free trade is terrible, but we want our emissaries to go to the other side and say, we're only doing this because it's political theater. So if that's correct, right, if they're interested in the political theater, presumably I'm not in the prediction business, but one prediction would be you do away with instead of an ABC, anything but Clinton, it's now an ABB, anything but Bush. And so you would do away with the strategic economic dialogue, but try to do exactly the same high-level, relatively frequent interactions and just not draw any public attention to it, learning the lesson that the public attention raises expectations about resolving problems quickly and in very visible ways. I don't know what you're in the business of giving advice. I don't know whether you'd be giving this kind of advice to the political class.
I think leaders should know each other before they have to deal with really serious issues.
Yes, of course.
And it's a responsibility of leadership to know the people that you have to deal with when the going gets rough.
And I think, that's just on my own personal experience, when you enter any kind of negotiation, to have a sense of who the person is on the other side of the table, rather than just listening to the words, it makes a night and day difference. So I couldn't agree with you more, but I do think that the symbolism of this stuff, the importance of symbolic politics at the moment in Washington strikes me as being incredibly high. Maybe that's because it's an election season, but I would be concerned that whoever's the president is going to have a pretty big obligation to deliver on some of this political theater in 2009. I don't know what your feeling is about that.
Well, I was listening to both of you and thinking that, of course it's a great thing to have the leadership know each other, and of course it's a great thing to have them talk about these issues on a positive level, but too often the incentive, as it comes from the citizenry, is negative. It comes out of anxiety and fear either on the growing size of the Chinese military or anger over Chinese involvement in Darfur, or the sense, again, of this history. I mean, I was thinking about your analogy to the Japanese and how the Japanese were seen as at least democratic, coming over here, investing in the U.S. People took a while to get accustomed to it. To the contrary, the imagery that attaches to China in the American mind has to do with the Dalai Lama, with Tibet, with Tiananmen Square. It has to do with Taiwan and the arguments that we have surveyed here this afternoon. There's very little positive. It's surprising. I don't know if you would hold the elites at fault for not making the positive presentation of the Chinese leadership or the opportunities that exist in China. But I wonder if it's not limited, in listening to the two of you, to the business world.
Yeah, well, on that score, I don't know what you think about this, State, but the World Bank the state of the art in the World Bank on globalization says globalization is unambiguously good, not only for Davos man, but in particular for the poor. So the headline finding from the World Bank is that 25% less people, 25% fewer people in the world at the poverty level in 2000 than 1990. You strip that away, you just look one layer below it, and more than half of that poverty reduction is in China. Right? And so you would think, just about the political framing, that people who are people who are interested in portraying China more positively would talk about this, just the unprecedented lifting of hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in China that's occurred, both because of the economic reforms in China, but also because of globalization. And I don't think that's a story that ever gets told.
I agree, and I had the opportunity to go to China in December for the first time. That's the story that leaped out at me. The story that's never in the American press, the story that's never on American television, and a story that I think is not understood by your average American citizen. Again, away from self-interest, which is people not wanting to lose their jobs even if they knew this, but to me that's an inspiring story, and it's one, again, that the Olympics gives you the opportunity to tell. I fear that it's not going to be told, however.